Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Alleviate the decline in computer science across the country. You may or may not know that there's a huge decline right now in CS enrollment, and it's especially true among women in CS, and we're trying to build some programs to help improve that situation. As part of that effort, we've been working with Northwestern, and from Northwestern, I'm pleased to introduce a PhD student, Robin Huneke. Robin has been instrumental in the game industry in the United States. She helped introduce some leading titles, if you're familiar with Katamari Darcy. She has also been a major person in independent games development and has been participating with that group. Robin has her AI PhD in the final phases of completion, and she's been heavily recruited, and hopefully she'll come to Microsoft, but she has some very nice offers. So, Robin Huneke.
Turn on my microphone, and you should be able to hear me. All right, awesome. So yeah, I'm going to be talking today a little bit about my experience in computer science, which has been interesting and different, and I think that one of the reasons why I'm still in computer science is because my experience has been interesting and different, and that's kind of what I want to talk about today. I will explain a little bit about why I'm here in Seattle. This is my first trip, so it's lovely to meet all of you Seattleites. John, as you just met, is here. I'm here sort of to talk to people at MSR a little bit about what I've been doing and about this curriculum initiative. A good friend of mine from Intel has just come and joined the Windows Graphics and Gaming Technologies group named Kim Pallister, so he's a new employee, fresh on the Kool-Aid. My friend Chris Butcher is the lead, sort of tech lead over at Bungie, so I've been communicating with them for a long time, just about the problems that they face as developers and stuff, and we've been working together sort of at indie events and stuff, and I always enjoy hanging out with him. And then I have a friend here in the city, just one of many, named Casey Moriarty, who does independent game development. He's a hotshot programmer who started off at Microsoft when he was still in high school, immediately jumped and left and started a company with a guy named Chris Hecker, who went off and did some other things and now works for Will Wright. And Casey just recently left Rad Game Tools to start his own company, and he's building an awesome new indie game at Molly Rocket, which is his company. So if you get a chance, check it out. The thing that's interesting about all these people is they're all passionate about games in some way, and they all have sort of touched my life in an interesting and different way. Some of them are, researchers. Some of them are evangelists. You have a person who's like an incredibly technical programmer who's doing commercial products, someone who's worked on tools and is now doing indie games. And so I think it's interesting to know that I have this really weird network associated with me that's bringing me here, because it's also why I am interested in what I do. If I wasn't able to meet different kinds of people, I wouldn't be nearly as excited about what I do. What I do is computer science. Technically, I'm finishing my PhD in computer science at Northwestern. I have had a sort of checkered past, which we'll talk about a little bit, with respect to my focus and what I've been doing. But most lately, I've been doing robotics, art, and technology work, and specifically focusing on AI and games. And my thesis, which I'm not going to talk about today, but there's stuff about it online, is about dynamic difficulty adjustment for games. So making games more responsive to players. So getting that challenge curve working so that you don't have to have easy, medium, hard, insane. You can just start playing and it knows what you're doing. We're well beyond the point where we should be paying attention to the user. All those button presses add up to something, and so we should be paying attention to that. And so that's what my work has been on. I've also, because of my focus on games, been really interested in game design, and you can't really go and learn about game design in university programs. So for the last 5 years, I've been kind of cheating. I volunteer through the IGDA and the Game Developers Conference, and then I talk to all these people who solve all these hard problems every day, and then I get a little bit of an education just in doing that. So my primary core textbook is actually the game development community, and I've been doing a lot of work teaching and thinking about game design and game tuning, which has helped me conduct my academic research, as well as establish bridges between people that I know that are doing cool stuff in AI and games and other types of graphics and stuff like this, with people that are solving hard problems in industry. So that's also been really interesting. As I get ready to kind of go out there into the real world and do real stuff, away from my piles of papers and notes and stuff and whiteboards, which I love. I'm interested in confronting technical problems and solving them from a design perspective, so really keeping the player in mind, not just saying, let's work on this really hard AI problem because it'll probably be fun once we figure out how to solve it. I mean, chances are it won't. So actually picking the right problems and solving those is just a hard enough problem. I'm really interested in learning how to do that well from a commercial perspective as well as a research perspective. And facilitating an interdisciplinary dialogue around those concepts so that people from different areas are working together to solve those problems, and that those people are diverse. The problems are diverse. It's not just pathfinding. It's not just, behaviors. And that the products themselves are diverse. So you have a diverse group of people working on an interesting set of problems and shipping and making and putting out there stuff that evangelizes games as a medium and an expressive medium, not just media. Now, there aren't a lot of people like me out there. I meet a lot of people, and there aren't many of me. And I don't think it's because there aren't people who are interested in the things I'm interested in. I think it's because a lot of people don't know that there's the chance to do this kind of stuff. Like 99% of the time when I tell people what I do, I get this like, you get to do that? Like someone supported you through grad school to do those things? And it actually hasn't been easy. It's been hard to sort of do the things I wanted to do, but I decided I wanted to do them. And now I want to make it easier for other people to do that. So this talk is about what I think would be required to do that. I'm not an expert, and I have never made another me yet, in either the traditional sense or the academic sense. So we'll see. Someday I'll probably have a chance to test at least one of those. But that's what the talk is going to be about. So we're going to be talking about repositioning CS, and to sort of cheat and tell you where I want to go. I think that computer science is more than a discipline. It's a foundation for approaching your life and problems in a procedural way that when you start to do interdisciplinary work, it just touches on so many things. And I've had such an eye-opening experience with computers and machines and the people that use them, engineering and thinking about things in the real world from this really nice, clean environment where you can go in and do stuff and then take it back out into the messy and chaotic real world, or building chaos and then managing it inside those places, that I think that we need to sort of evangelize this as a way of life, as a Zen, I guess. And if we're going to attract and keep new people in computer science, we're going to have to start doing stuff like this, because if you just keep pushing on the common perception of computer science, we're not going to see our audience grow. So it's kind of about branding, I think. We're going to start a little bit earlier when I was small with some of my early exposures to computer science. So when I was probably 9, 10 years old, my dad was a nuclear engineer, so he worked at General Electric, and then he did some quality management stuff for them. My mom is a historian and a basket weaver and a person who loves to do applied kind of artistic things. And so I was actually trained early on in life as a fine artist. My brother was really into sports and stuff. I loved Cosmos, the television show, on PBS, and I loved cartoons. I was really interested in science and technology, but not because I wanted to go and explore space, but because I thought space was so inspirational. And I didn't really want to draw cartoons, but I loved the way cartoons looked and acted, and I was really excited about those kinds of things. As I got older, and I started to be able to kind of choose the people that I wanted to be like, looking out in the popular culture, I wanted to be a tinkerer. I wanted to be someone who understood how things came apart and could be put back together. And I really wanted to go explore stuff. I wanted to climb stuff. I wanted to get lost. I wanted to dig things up and discover things. And I didn't necessarily feel like I had to be the #1 astronaut or the #1 guy solving the problem. And I didn't have a lot of female role models in these sort of areas. But I did get to do a lot of really cool tinkering and exploring in games. And at that time, I think, I was really influenced by how creative and open these environments were. And people always say, oh, you look back at the games you played when you were a kid, and oh, they're so overloaded with stuff, and back then you really made up your own mind about what they meant. But I really did feel that these early experiences with Atari and with Nintendo and with PC games like Mule, which was a sort of a space exploring game, a first attempt at a turn-based strategy game on the PC. These things were really impactful for me, and I didn't realize this until very recently, just how much they reinforced the idea within me that I could be that explorer without ever having to see a female MacGyver on television. However, they were not my machines. I wasn't encouraged to own gaming machines. I wasn't encouraged to kind of appropriate the technology for myself. It was either my brother's stuff or my friend's brother's stuff. And this kind of continued for a long time in my early career as a student. I was branded as gifted, and I was given the opportunity to do a lot of interesting exploratory curriculum stuff, especially with the fine arts. But whenever I encountered computers or computer technology, it was with sort of this creative stuff in mind, not procedural thinking, not programming, not thinking about math, not solving hard problems. It was, hey, here's some fun stuff on a computer, do it, and maybe it'll sort of expand your way of approaching computer technology. I didn't really know what computer programming was for a very, very, very long time, which baffles me now. I spent a lot of time in college or in elementary school going to a local college and experiencing art curriculums that were designed by undergraduates, sort of hippie stuff, and you get to do whatever you wanted. And like, again, I was able to use computers then, which at the time were extremely expensive and not something that a lot of people were able to get in touch with. But it was always under this umbrella of creating stuff, making new things, trying new ways of expressing yourself, not necessarily thinking about a problem, solving the problem using the technology in a procedural way. As I moved into sort of traditional education, I had these experiences over and over and over again with art education because my parents really wanted me to go into fine art and because they were positive about engineering. Math and science education were valued. But all of my experiences outside of school were about creating and expressing myself, and all of my experiences inside of school were about learning what other people had to tell me. And in my mind, science and math were things that other people owned, and art was something that I owned. And that was a very important thing for me later in life to realize that, like, actually, no, I own science too. I own math too. I own computer science as well. And I think that this sort of night and day problem has sort of followed me throughout my history as a grad student and into sort of my experience of the life of the mind, which is what I went to the University of Chicago as an undergrad, and that's sort of their catch recruiting phrase is live the life of the mind. So it's no surprise, it's no secret that 7th to 12th grade, sort of, 12 to 17 or so, girls are not encouraged to participate in math and sciences, and you've read all sorts of articles about it, I'm sure. Myself, in particular, I was given an increased focus on the humanities and extracurricular activities, like doing yearbook and like participating in the literary magazine and stuff. I enjoyed these things so much, so immensely. I had so many great experiences with mentors, with professors and at local schools who would, read my little poems and then, you do a little contest and you get a little dictionary from Brown or something. It was just so great to feel like I was part of an academic community. But again, it was always this sort of extracurricular art, I own it kind of stuff. And my overall enthusiasm about school was really waning. I actually went through a period in around 10th grade where I started just totally flaking out, skipping class, not paying attention, hanging out with the wrong crowd. And my parents, again, as usual, decided to supplement my education by sending me away. They sent me to Home Reading College, which is one of the small colleges of Cambridge. They were doing another, once again, a strange pioneering program where students were using computers in conjunction with education about poetry and fine art to express themselves. And I met a bunch of really motivated students there who I thought were awesome. And I saw for the first time, the published works of William Blake. So pieces of beautiful poetry done with this like crazy pagan themes and lovely artwork that he made himself, and that he was really stepping out across boundaries, across disciplines to do these two things at the same time. This just completely transformed me. Like, all of a sudden I wanted a computer, right? But of course they were very expensive. My parents couldn't afford one. Just getting me over to Cambridge, I'm not really quite sure how they did it. But I realized that art and the liberal arts were something that I felt really close to, but the computers were there. They were in that realm. I could push towards them in my curriculums. And luckily, when I got to the U of C, again, totally non-standard, I was able to take a programming class called Computer Programming is a Liberal Art. Now this was, it was a pioneering, flaky program that people thought was really weird, being taught where we were learning about everything from the poetics to, thinking about computer science and as part of like this digital community stuff and pushing out. I did so much reading for this class. I did so much elective reading. It was like, wow, here's computer science, here's sociology, here's ancient history, here's oral narrative and storytelling, here's architecture. Just like at the center of all of these disciplines was the computer. And I I learned how to program. I started writing programs in HyperCard, and then eventually we learned Pascal. And I was going to the computer lab voluntarily, suddenly, just spending hours and hours and hours just like in front of the computer making stuff. It was a totally strange experience because it was almost schizophrenic. In my day life, I was a student at the University of Chicago who was reading fine books and living the life of the mind, but at night I was like hanging out in the computer lab by myself, hacking away, and people would be like, where were you? You know, like I didn't see you at the party, or you know, you weren't at the dinner. It was because I was trying to take these two worlds and like jam them together. I decided to make my own major at the University of Chicago, so there was no computer science major. And I really didn't want to be a computer scientist anyway. I decided I wanted to do something else. So I did this program that they had at the time called General Studies in the Humanities. It's now interdisciplinary studies in the humanities, but it's the same essential thing. I studied film, fine art, you know, the Bible. I looked at the ways people sort of remembered things about themselves and told stories about themselves to understand better how I could become a good communicator with this new tool, because I really felt I'd been given all this training in how to write stories and answer questions and even math. I mean, I could solve proofs, I could write equations, but computer programming was just this like totally open area. I felt like I had no scaffold, and so I had to go back and kind of relearn how people approach these new disciplines and then sort of apply that to computer science. And I ended up really focusing on storytelling and memory, and how my bachelor's thesis, which was a horribly self-referential HyperCard program or SuperCard program at the time that was sort of a narrative that you could read and then it would change as you read it, so you go back and forth in it, which I hope never sees the light of day, was about how I approached myself as a creator, as a woman, as a computer scientist, as a student in college, and then how having this experience sort of made me go back and rewrite these little stories in my mind about, oh yeah, no, that was a gendered experience of science, or oh, that was a gendered feeling about computers, or oh, you know, I really wish the Nintendo had been mine. And like going back and doing that, I was like, let's capture that sort of process and study it, because this is how people learn and this is how people grow and change. And I ended up taking a lot of classes, finding mentors in computer science, and experimenting with computer technologies in ways that were totally unstructured. Like, I wasn't part of a curriculum. And it worked out really well for me, because I could work at my own pace, I could work with people who I found compelling. It was, to me, an ideal experience of a college curriculum. It was something I had designed for myself and I had built to sort of accomplish a goal. And it was only later that I realized, as I was hanging out with graduate students and sort of getting a feel for what advanced computer science education would be like, this was just not how it was normally done. That you were usually just given a book and a bunch of problems, and you solved the problems from the beginning to the end, and you were graded on them, and you were supposed to sort of work together, but you weren't supposed to cheat, and there was all this kind of like, well, really, you know, in the end, who can get it done fast, and there was a lot of like competition among the students. Very different experience from what I had had up until that point. As I worked in the AI lab at the University of Chicago, I started getting in with a group of people that had studied at Yale with Roger Schenck, so I read a bunch of stuff about Schenkian reasoning. I started thinking about case-based reasoning, story-based memory, context and remindings, a lot of Phil Agree's early work. I was really interested in computer science from these sort of almost like fuzzy perspectives or hippie perspectives. It was not a neat. I was somebody who was doing this sort of like what at the time I think was considered kind of out there stuff. But I didn't care, because I wasn't trying to be a computer scientist. I was just trying to solve problems I thought were compelling. I also started playing computer games again. Like this whole time that I've been talking, as I've been growing up, I had left computer games, you know, on the shelf when I started junior high probably. And only when the PlayStation came out and I could pick up and be Lara Croft, I could be Parappa the Rapper, I could try these new things, I remembered suddenly this feeling of like, wow, that's me, that's me doing that crazy stuff in this world that I've never experienced before. I'm learning, I'm doing new things. And this was also really transformative. And I started thinking, there's got to be something to do here in graduate school. Should I become a graduate student? At this time, I just did a double take, because I realized that there were hardly any women in my program. And I wanted to ask somebody, like, what are the trade-offs of being a computer scientist? Like, will I have to work all the time? Will I be able to have a family? Like, whew, you know, this is like pretty heavy stuff. Like, I could be in grad school for 10 years. As it turned out, I kind of was. And I needed someone to look to. So I went on the internet, which was another emerging technology at the time, and I was so excited. And I ended up hooking up with Ellen Spertus, who had written a paper about why there were so few female computer scientists. And I wrote her this email that was probably extremely silly because, grad students, young students always write you these gushy emails and stuff. And it was a super gushy email that essentially said, I don't consider myself a computer scientist or a mathematician, but I want to solve this problem. I want to think about how people tell stories and become people and adults and how we learn to empathize and retell ourselves. Can I do it? And she said, if you don't love math, don't do computer science. That was the message. And I looked at that email for a long time. And I am really, really stubborn. So I decided to go ahead and do it anyway. I was like, well, the worst thing that can happen is I'll drop out and I'll move out to San Francisco where all my friends are and get a job at one of those startup companies, do a .com thing. So I figured, what do I have to lose? Because if I really fail at it, if it really is that math is the barrier to entry for me, I can learn math. I know math. I just don't love it that way. I love this other stuff. So I went ahead and I did it anyway. I had the same experience in graduate school that I have had almost consistently throughout my life with science and art education. During the day, in my classes, I was being given these really dry things to do, basic curriculum stuff like, here's Pascal's triangle, print it out, make it look like a square, do this, this, and this. Like, here's this, really dry, boring curriculum about how computers are made. We're not actually going to do any, hacking on computers. We're just going to open up the book and look at the diagram, and then you're going to memorize it, and then you're going to fill out a form, and then you'll be done. I was really surprised that graduate education could even be this dry. In my nightlife, when I was actually doing research, the research that was supporting me as a grad student, I had so many projects, so many interesting things to do. The group that I was working with at the time was doing Google-esque kind of knowledge representation and information retrieval systems. I built a system that helped find restaurants. I built a system that compared your taste in movies with other taste in movies and did a bunch of collaborative filtering. I got to do interface design. I got to look through reams and reams of books about movies, which I loved films. I got to go see tons of films. And all of it was kind of done at the same time with other programmers in my group. So we were always like, oh no, that's not a very good idea for the architecture. You should probably do this kind of system and blah, blah, blah. We were working pairwise in small, agile groups, solving these problems for free, because hopefully the lab would prosper and the U of C would be super excited about all the stuff we were doing there and it would be great, right? And even though that didn't end up happening, and my group ended up leaving the University of Chicago because our work was too applied, I learned so much in that time about what it means to work in a small group with people towards an interesting problem that I was just totally hooked. So no matter how bad my experience of computer science could have been, even if they had forced me to write an operating systems optimization thesis, I still would have stayed with it because I really got that bug for working with other people and solving hard problems. And I was playing a ton of games at this time. I started playing Magic. I started playing board games. I really opened myself up to the notion that you can work hard and you can play hard, and those two things can have a real impact on each other and can be very sort of fruitful. When I ended up at Northwestern, my whole group sort of just left one side of Chicago and moved to the other. I had this new group, and I had a lot of new opportunities to work with interesting people who were solving cool problems, and I ended up kind of moving from knowledge representation and web stuff into robotics because it was really applied, and you could do interesting stuff with simulation and game studies. And at that same time, Michael Matthias, who's just finished his sort of his early thesis work that he's been doing in conjunction with Andrew Stern, first at CMU and then now at Georgia Tech, he's a professor there. They held a conference on narrative intelligence and sort of using computers to do sort of smart things in games for AI research and actually getting this to be a justifiable sort of funded approach in AI. I went to that conference, I started thinking about game studies, I started meeting people in the game development community, and then I just said, that's it, I'm going to do game AI. I'm going to look at games, I'm going to look at AI, and I started the process of actually trying to be funded as a student. The most interesting thing to me about this process was that my new community was just as much academics as it was applied actual game programmers. I found the game development community to be almost like a little sort of group of Robin Hood researchers who'd gone off and decided to work on these problems together and solve them, doing the kind of small, iterative, flexible, agile iteration over a whole host of problems, graphics and so forth. And I really found them to be a very accepting community, very different from the computer science community I had grown up with or sort of grown up in the shadow of or in fear of almost. And I felt that if I hadn't actually found them, I probably would have gotten really down and out. I don't even know if I would have finished, because these people were the ones that kind of came to me and said, you know, those are hard problems. We do need to solve those problems. And we could actually reach people. We could reach more people if we solve those problems. So in connecting with them, I've tried to give back as much as I can as a person by supporting events like the Indie Game Jam, where we get together for 4 days and we use an engine and we program up a bunch of games just using the technology in that engine. Then we show them at the Game Developers Conference. Or the Experimental Gameplay Workshop, in which these games are shown, which is a 3-hour session where we try to highlight unique types of gameplay and like whether it's technical sort of solutions to problems or actual like game design ideas, try and get the knowledge out there in the community and be sort of an academic force almost for game developers. And then I've also been teaching in this workshop where we look at games from a paper perspective. We take video games and we take it back to dice and cards and stuff, and we work out what kinds of mechanics actually are extant in these video games, and then talk to people about tuning them. These resources for me have been extremely invigorating because they're very full of rapid feedback about my research and about things I'm thinking about. And connecting with the community has, I think, made me an extremely flexible and open researcher. It's really knocked down a lot of my barriers to having my ideas kicked around, which I think is really important. And in the process of being involved with that community, I've realized that actually games are focusing on a lot of the same problems. Like, you're seeing a lot of the same issues that we have in computer science cropping up in games. There's a diversity issue. You know, there's a lot of specifically, there's a lot of room to grow for women in games. There's really no female game designers that are famous, because there are no female game designers that ever get the giant projects on the magazines and so forth. And there are a lot of students that need help, that want to solve these problems, and they're getting kind of left behind as the technology moves further and further on. The companies are starting to have to drag people in and train them. So it's been very interesting to see that, like, my experience of computer science has bled out into the industry, which is then sort of causing me to come back in and be like, okay, how can we fix this stuff? I think that blending theory and practice is the key, and that's like an easy thing to say, but it's a hard thing to do. It's hard to get people to work together on problems. It's hard to find common goals to work towards. And specifically, using procedural knowledge to communicate about these things is not something that we train most kids to do. Starting very young and all the way out, there's this night-day problem in the way we're sort of evangelizing thinking this way. And even as I've been successful in my own approach to this stuff, I've been pushing further and further away from traditional avenues of publishing, traditional ways of getting funding. And the long-term impact of my stuff is, you know, I'd be the first to admit that I have doubts sometimes about how much my particular trajectory through computer science is going to enliven certain kinds of debate about computers, or support, you know, expertise and specialization in my field. So looking back over all that stuff and thinking about who I have become and trying to think of ways to make more of me, I've been really asking myself, why is enrollment falling? We've seen it at Northwestern. In the last 3 years, 4 individual schools in the Chicago area have approached me to ask me to help them develop games-centered curriculums, because games are sexy and games are new, and this will get people interested in computer education again. Whether they're a for-profit school like DePaul, an art school like Columbia, Northwestern, or the University of Chicago, everyone's trying to get in on this new thing. And I think that one of the big things we don't talk about when we have these meetings is what people actually think about computer science. Like, what are women who are freshmen in college? What is their impression of computer science? What do they think about it? And what can we do to change it? Why should anyone major in computer science? Are the textbooks and the courses taught in ways that are accessible and like flexible and interested in actually getting people to learn? Or are they mostly taught in ways that are about weeding people out and kind of crushing them with hard problems early, so that in the end they will be the kind of person that will grind through a problem set and get to the answer? When you're given a problem in computer science, how often is it expressive of the things you're really interested in as a person? I mean, it's great to be able to program and to get a job programming, but that's only going to be part of your life. You may be really interested in music. You may be really interested in cooking. Who knows? How often do we really approach computer science from the perspective of it's one of a part of things that create a person and help them achieve their goals? In that light, is it useful to learn computer programming if you don't want to be a programmer, if you don't want to be someone who does computer science? And if you do that, is it enjoyable? I mean, games is getting slammed right now because electronic arts is being just on every newspaper. You know, you're just imagining these hordes of, you know, teenaged boys at their desks, like barely legal to program, like slamming away at the keyboards for, you know, 12, 15, 30-hour shifts, you know. We create these kind of demonizing images within our culture of computing, within our culture of development and games, and then we let them prosper outside. And we don't do a lot of work to sort of position computer science as actually this stuff that you're starting to see in some of the new Microsoft campaigns, like use the computer to create new hats, like use the computer to connect to your grandma or whatever. We're not doing a lot of that stuff internally in computer science because I think we're just not recognizing that we have a branding problem. And in the end, I think the profitable thing to do from a perspective of not just the university, but also companies that build software, companies that sell software, companies that need people who can talk about software, is to change this. If you think about computer science as a discipline, yes, it's nice to have credibility. It's nice to be able to talk to each other in the same language. It's nice to have specialization. I love algorithms. I love to geek out about algorithms, not as much as I love Freud. I love geeking about people more, which is why I became an AI person. But I've never had a conversation with a computer scientist that hasn't been fascinating to me. However, it's difficult sometimes for me. Now that I'm getting further and further away from specialization in my own field, which is very small, because I'm trying to do a lot more evangelism and sort of bridging and networking, I can even have problems just talking about AI sometimes. If I move over into algorithms or operating systems or computer graphics or whatever, I actually just recently asked somebody, what's a really good book for me to read about modern game production pipeline computer graphics? Because I really just feel like when I'm sitting at dinner with these guys who are programming, you know, shaders for the Xenon or whatever, that I'm not able to keep up. It's harder and harder as we specialize and grow as a discipline to kind of actually maintain a notion of what computer science is. And that means that there's boundaries. That means there's inertia for us to communicate with each other. That means that we're actually playing into the stereotype that each of us is in a little cube studying something. I'm reading that book about shaders because if I don't keep reading the book about shaders, I won't be able to program shaders. And I'm over here being like, yeah, I really have to sort of figure out how to write a new AI textbook because kids aren't learning AI or whatever, you know, and we're just not communicating. I would like to start evangelizing computer science as a core competency and a tool. And now whenever someone asks me what I do, I say, I work in games and AI. I'm an artist and I'm also a programmer. I didn't used to evangelize myself as a programmer, but I think it's something that just has to be done. I think everyone who programs needs to sort of say, oh, you know, I can program, I do these other things too, you know. I'm a really great cook, whatever you're advertising at a dinner party, say that you program. Like, computer science is important. And thinking about things from that perspective is a really, really valuable experience. We can teach the tools of programming, whether it's NetLogo or C++ or Pascal or whatever. We can teach polish and craft later. We can teach people to be awesome engineers for, you know, particular types of systems, to be extremely good at something after we hook them with the experience of actually having their hands inside the machine, changing something. I had a friend who, you know, many years ago he programmed, and then he grew up and got a job doing some sort of IT thing, then he became a consultant, and he never really touched the computer other than do email. And then he had a kid, and the kid said, I want a PC. And so he bought him a PC. And then he called another friend of mine and said, where's the programming language on this thing? Like, when I learned how to use a computer, I was using an interpreter. I was programming the machine. My kid needs that experience. Like, no, you have to go into the web. You have to figure out what language or pay someone a huge amount of money for a development environment or hope that someone gives you one in school. But in the end, the experience of actually interacting with the machine is very different. I think we need to get away from focusing on computer science as this thing that's walled in about expertise and push out. And if you go back all the way to my early experiences with gifted classes, one of the things that we did was a phenomenon called Stories with Holes, where it was like a 20 questions story where you'd ask, you'd get a little teaser and then you have to kind of guess what happened, and the 4 or 5 of the kids in the class would work together kind of thinking about different scenarios and essentially doing simulation and then asking questions about those simulations to the teacher until we got close enough to an answer to kind of move on. The scientific method, same thing. Learning how to ask questions about a problem until you could get to a good answer. Those things are procedural. Those are programming-like, engineering-like thought processes. But we're not evangelizing that way. And we're not using the tools that we could be using to make those things happen. NetLogo is free. Like, it's free. And you can do development of curriculums. They're extremely interested in working with people We're just not doing it. And there's all kinds of problems for this. I mean, there's politics and finance and all the other things that are associated with it. But individually as computer scientists, I think we're giving it short shrift. If we can expand people's views of machines to include this notion that procedural thinking is just part of life. It's the kind of thing you do when you're going through the process of elimination about what to pack for a trip, because you know you have to do a job talk, but you also have to do a party, this kind of stuff. Making decisions, executing, thinking about things at a higher level, organizing your thoughts, establishing processes, optimizing, all the things you have to do when you're writing computer code, using a machine. Those things are part of our everyday life, and I think they're vital to us being competitive as a society in terms of the global marketplace, but also to being able to empathize with each other, because you can establish a level of communication about a process without having to get down into the details. It's easy to say this stuff. It's hard to actually implement it. Like, if we assume that tomorrow, George Bush comes up to me and says, I think you're totally right, we have to fix this problem, it's horrible, here's billions of dollars, we're going to stop spending it on military stuff, or we're going to pull it from the space program, or wherever we're going to get it, we're going to starve the teachers, we're going to give you all the money. If he did that, the first thing that I would do is I would ask, how can we make projects in computer science education and education in general more about choice, more about expression, more about making an impact on a thing that you care about? And people who have evangelized computer science curriculums as like computer science for learning and learning in the classroom with machines have said this, but I don't think they've gotten to the fundamental problem, which is that your work says something about you. Women are sensitive to the fact that if they're going to choose work over a family, which is a choice we have to make, the way we're raised, at least in Western society, an active choice. If you're going to choose work over relationships and over investment in a family, it has to say something positive about you. You don't want to choose working in a toll booth unless you really have to, because you already have a family and you need to support it. You want to do something that's about you. And people need to be more aware of this and actually focus on it. If you're part of a sort of a minority community or a marginalized community, your work is going to say something about you. And if you have a chance to connect that, you're going to try and do it. And I think we're not focusing on the fact that computer science as a tool connects to just about everything these days. It's such an easy way to slip into finance or slip into ecology studies or slip into something else. If you can program, you can go help people who've been thinking about these things for a long time make a difference. And those real-world applications are the things that I think are going to motivate people like me to not shut the book on computer science, to not think that computer science is about sitting in a room by yourself staring at code. It's been awesome to be a trailblazer. I obviously love to talk. I love to talk about myself. And I enjoy the feeling of having been sort of an explorer. Like I said earlier, that's one of my core values, is being able to go and dig up stuff and bring it back and be like, this is what I found. But it would be better for most people if there were already bridges there in place. And I think my #1 problems right now are that journals and conferences are like popping up all over the place, but it's very disorganized. It's not really clear to me which ones are the right ones. Academics in my space and games and computer science are having this problem where there's suddenly, like 10 years too late, people are realizing that we need to start talking about this stuff. They've all kind of gone off into their respective areas and are churning out stuff. Ken Perlin's doing his thing, Mike Van Len's doing his thing, Michael Matthias and Andrew Stern are doing their thing. And it's only because we're friends with each other that we know each other. We're going to need to start really building in good journals, really good conferences, and kind of focusing those efforts. Websites, mailing lists, sort of computer-facilitated groups, and also gatherings. And travel and internship programs. These are the kinds of things you can do to support and build bridges after the trailblazers have done it. And I think if you look, you'll see this kind of activity already happening, particularly in biology with the stuff people are doing in biology and chemistry. And this is probably all old news to you guys, but I really do think that if I were going to try and shape the dialogue about this, this is the stuff I would talk about. What are the core values of your students? Who are they? Like, students at Northwestern are a particular kind of student. Students at Howard University are a particular kind of student. They have a certain gender breakdown, they have a certain race breakdown, they have a certain sort of class and country ethnicity breakdown. What are they, and what do those people care about? Are they connected to their communities, and if so, how? And how can we make it better for them and have them be a broadcast that says, I've been doing these programming classes and I ended up making this really crazy web page and now it's getting like 50,000 hits a day. Projects. How can we make projects happen that pinpoint problems in these communities and these communication channels, help people share knowledge about them and work on them together. I think the idea of the computer science Ronin is an old idea and it's outdated. Game curriculums are traditionally positioned as the successful example for this stuff. DigiPen, hardcore, you go there, you learn how to do all kinds of crazy games programming and stuff, and you come out and you get a job. CMU, they have this crazy prototyping lab, and like the kids are doing all this great stuff with gameplay, and they are all working for Will-Wright. I'm like, literally, they are all working for Will-Wright. MIT, you know, you have this, Henry Jenkins has this really great cultural studies program where people are looking at games and avatars and gender and thinking about community-created products. They're consulting with companies and trying to figure out how to make, you know, games a center point for community activity and stuff. USC has a film group working in games, has an AI group working in games. John Seeley Brown is now there doing stuff. He's also working with the American Libraries and the MacArthur Foundation to try and sort of blow up our notion of the library as a tinkering and community space and get back to something really cool in the libraries. University of IT Copenhagen graduated the first PhD in computer science, my friend Jesper, about 4 years ago. And there are a lot of others. People are using these as examples where you can take all these different disciplines and hook them together through the icon or the center or the love of games. And I have that love, and I think that's really great. But I also think there's a lot of other stuff going on. And just core to making more of me is recognizing that I am not just a gamer. I am also a woman who loves to cook. I am also a shoe fanatic. I started a shoe group on Orkut. It now has over 40,000 members. Like, I love being part of parties and communities and networks. I'm into all the social networking stuff. I love email, I love chat. I love to draw. I love Katamari Damacy. There's so many things about me that could be used as a lever to sort of get into computer science. Just looking at major disciplines, it's not hard to see the jump to robotics and biology and chemistry. Environmental science, my cousin is a huge environmental science nut. I would love for her to be able to sort of go into Python and script up a simulation of some numbers she got back off of tests she's running on, she's actually out in Baltimore doing a tree repopulation program. Economics and business. There's tons of stuff going on right now with the biology of economics and how people make choices about investment. Like the entire, I think it was Sweden, their entire country went over to open social security system with investments, and they created this huge data set by asking people to choose between different types of funds. Someone's got to crunch that data and decide, is that a test case for what we're going to do here if we do it? You know, these are the kinds of things computer scientists can do, but they don't have to be computer scientists. They can be economists. They can be environmental scientists. And also design and innovations research. I think there's a huge amount of interesting data just to be gathered from the process of creating something like a game and how it happens and then how it grows and changes over time. Kellogg, actually, I have some colleagues there that are going to be doing some work with games and design research, which I think is going to be really fabulous. But what about other things? I mean, stuff you wouldn't normally think about. Film, coming up with computational processes that change more than just the visual experience of film. What if we really did do interactive films? I know it sounds horrible, but I think there's still potential there. Fine art, you know, I mean, computational tools for doing fine art, John Maeda stuff. I mean, sculptures, you name it, like that's wide open, right? Not just fine art, performance art, you know, which is a fine art. I'm sorry, performance art people. Music, theater and performance, gender and cultural studies, these kinds of things. You can push down on computer science and critical theory and talk about how computer science interfaces with all these other things. You can actually use computational tools to study these things. We're not advertising the fact that this is true. My advisor at Northwestern University has been doing a curriculum called the Animate Arts curriculum. And over the last 4 years, my thoughts about this stuff have been really shaped by his approach to the topic. He's decided to use a Bauhaus model in which people all learn the same tool, and then they move into concentric rings of focusing on different types of things, and eventually they specialize into a little pie. It's a very interesting way to approach education. It worked great for the Bauhaus. They turned out some awesome stuff, in my opinion. He's built a scheme-based programming tool called Meta that allows people to do in an interpreted environment art projects, essentially, digital art projects. He's demystifying the idea of computation and taking a lot of the pain out of learning how to program by admitting that computer science is an arbitrary kind of thing, that it's just as much philosophy and critical theory and art as it is math and science. And he's reinforcing these creative drives in these students who come to college thinking, I need to get a job, I need to get a job, I need to get a job. He's hooking them, saying, computer science is a tool that you can use in your job. And then he's saying, you know what, though? Wouldn't it be really cool if you kind of stuck around for a while and did some cool prototypes or some art stuff? Or, you seem to be really into films. Maybe you could do some really creative stuff with digital film. We have a tool right here. Step up to the Macintosh. Step up to the PC. Let's try it out, Don't be afraid to be computational. You can be creative. You can make a difference. Ian is a roboticist who is an artist at heart. He wanted to be an artist, and he's using his ability to communicate about computer science to encourage and invigorate an entire group of students that if you walk down a campus, you would not be able to pick them out of a crowd. You would not say, those people are computer scientists. In my mind, they are the next generation of computer scientists. They are punk rocks, freaks, hippies, whatever. They got sandals on in the middle of the winter. They are not the person you would expect them to be, and that makes me so happy, and a lot of them are women. I think that this kind of stuff will inspire new people. I think it will make for interesting contributions, and I think that if we can get over the barrier of thinking of computer science as a discipline and start really talking about it as a tool, and not just saying programming, because programming is one thing, but talking about understanding computation, procedural learning, procedural thinking, I think we can establish some really interesting precedents. I think we can create groups that cross-pollinate about problems that are hard to solve and getting harder to solve every day as our networks grow and our interactions with each other grow. And I think we can create long-term relationships between industries and disciplines that are fruitful for everybody. And more often than not, that's what leads to groundbreaking work, in my opinion, not sitting in a room by yourself staring at code. As much as that's a fulfilling experience for me, I don't think I'm going to have nearly as much of an impact as I could if I'm working with other people who are also smart. And so that's essentially what I'd like to inspire with this talk. If you have questions and you want to just hammer on me about it, that's fine. This is the first talk I've ever given about this subject, so you're a little bit of a guinea pig audience for me, which I apologize for. These are sort of some URLs for things I've been involved with, and then there's, of course, my URL at the bottom. And that's pretty much it. So at this point, I'll open it up to questions if you guys have anything you want to say, or just like criticism about the concepts. I'm more than welcome to entertain them. Yes?
Hi, that was a wonderful talk, and I hope you will give it many more times.
Thank you.
Because you said a lot of really useful and valuable things. There's been a lot of, debate online recently where people in the industry, women in the industry, have been saying we shouldn't be encouraging women to go into computer science because the jobs are going away and they're boring, and why would you want to go there? And I love the spin that you put on it, which is to think of it not as you're going to become a computer scientist, but that you're going to learn the skills of computer science to use in a variety of contexts, and that will be increasingly important. I don't think that message has been out there nearly enough. Yeah. I think too much of it has been going into computer science for computer science's sake.
Or to get a job being a programmer in San Francisco making $1 zillion billion, which was true for a very brief time, and I missed it.
Right.
I didn't go to Google.
More people need to be putting that message out there, and I hope you will make this visible.
I will, definitely. Yeah.
Because I think that's a really important message, and it's not. My NSF research is in the context of underrepresentation of women in IT education, and there's very little of what you're saying being said in that research community right now. There's a symposium that's going to be going on in Oxford this weekend that I'm very disappointed that I just had to cancel my attendance at, but at least it'll let me come here.
Yes, thank you.
That's good.
I still have to buy tickets to go to GDC Europe, which is in London this year, and I'm like,
but this is something I wish people at that symposium would be talking about too, and I'm actually going to send the summary in my notes to my colleague who's supposed to be there, and it was well said.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really shocked because I literally just pulled it out of my butt. Go ahead.
Hi, Rob. I thought it was an excellent talk, and having traveled around a little bit to CS departments, it would be nice to hear what's your impression, for instance, of, because I think they get in their own way. Yeah. What's the biggest hurdle you see in computer science in making these kinds of changes? Because some of this has been out there a while in different pieces, but I think you put it together in a nice package and cover a lot of areas. So what's your opinion on CS departments in general?
Yeah, well, I think the number one problem in any academic department is funding. Like, I mean, you go to dinner with someone who's hiring and they're like, funding, funding, funding. You bring a friend from industry and they're like, funding, funding, funding. And then you go back to your advisor and he's like, funding, funding, funding. I mean, that's the problem. Money is always the problem. So if you get away from the too many rats, too little cheese problem and you focus on actually what people are doing in their everyday life, they're reinforcing the notion that computer science is valuable because enrollment is going down. They are not pulling back out and looking at the trend. They are scrambling to keep their head above water and keep enrollments up and broadcasting like, in computer science you can take classes about games. In computer science you can take classes about really cool networking protocol stuff. Well, we've really got to keep teaching algorithms. But no, but we really have to make more sexy computer science programming with, let's do graphics with, you know, oh, let's teach them Maya. Oh, I don't know. And then like they're having this kind of discussion instead of going, who is our customer? You know, is our customer the university? Are we really trying to make the university have more enrollment? Because that's not really a problem right now. Are we trying to protect our job titles? Are we our customer? Me being Joe Computer Science who publishes, or Jane Computer Science who publishes routinely at SIGGRAPH, gets to go to all the great conferences and like be an expert on procedural shaders or animation. Like, that's an awesome job, and I want to keep that job, right? Like, I'm partly a customer. But if the end customer is humanity, you know, or knowledge, the life of the mind. Like, I've been indoctrinated on some level, as much as I hate to admit it, by the University of Chicago, and that I do really often think like, whoa, way out here, like, or way back here at Aristotle. If we're trying to sort of connect the everyday experience to the things that are true and have been true for centuries, we need to get beyond some of the customers that we think we're serving. And I think that it's just really difficult to do that when you're scrambling to justify your existence. And I would just like to say that this is true across the board in business. When you're in a group that's not justifiable, you're worried and you're making bad decisions. You're making decisions in the now. You're being reactive, not proactive. You're doing the need to do's, not the nice to do's, or the really need to do for the long haul. And I think that's the problem. Exactly. And the other thing is that in a group that's sitting around discussing the problem, how many of them actually did feel the pinch of having to decide whether or not they were going to have kids or pursue their PhD? How many of them are feeling the pinch of half of their family is across the world somewhere else, and they're really just trying to bring them over? You know, like, you have to look at the dialogue that's happening about these problems and who's having that dialogue. If you were just in Wired magazine because you did this crazy art project with one of your new grad students and, like, you're doing great, like, enrollment's down, who cares, you know? Next Fest is in town this week, let's go, you know? Like, I got a new tablet PC, fabulous. That's hard. It's hard to get more people that are interested in these problems into those arenas, and it's also hard for the people that are in them to admit that they're not really listening. And again, that's a problem. You know, people get promoted and they for doing something really good, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to help in the long run. I don't mean to be a pessimist. I don't mean to end an inspiring talk with like a horribly pessimistic answer, but I do think that that's sort of the primary problem. I think we should teach computer science like we teach spelling. I think it should be taught in elementary school. I wish I had learned how to program when I was 10. Like, I know that I spent years memorizing baseball card stats, D&D tables, and random crap, that if I had actually been applying that stuff to computer programming, I am so jealous and filled with envy when I talk to people whose parents were at universities who got to program on PDP-11s and stuff and use punch cards or saw punch cards, you know? The closest I ever got was dot matrix line printing paper that my dad brought home from work, you know?
I thought your talk very compelling. It's,
Thank you.
I myself, I have a background in liberal arts as well.
Good for you.
And if there had been programs like the one you described, I probably would have gone into that. My question now is, you presented very compelling arguments on how to bring women into computer science using gaming, AI, robotics. That makes a lot of sense. However, if I look at the bleak reality of things, like at the positions that are usually available for people with a background in computer science that would require a graduate to do stress testing, volume testing, building a server farm,
Yes.
whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reality behind that field of study, probably in more cases than having a cool job in gaming or AI, like a job that's cool to me because I have.
Right. I think the perception is there.
So-
yeah, because those industries don't know that they can advertise for those positions because
Yeah.
they're just barely getting resumes anyway. So they're like, hey, everyone, we need to hire. They don't think they need to do specific hiring for a woman who's motivated to solve institutional problems as well as can program.
How do you think will we get women into programming the next version of Windows, the next version of SQL Server, the next...
I'll tell you how you won't do it. You won't do it by designing promotional materials for your conferences which have female superheroes in them. I mean, I just came from Meltdown, and the promotional materials for the conference were offensive. I mean, and it's hard for me to say that because that's... Microsoft is paying me to be here. You guys are recording me. You're going to put me out on your intranet, but it's bad when I open up the proceedings for an academic conference and I'm confronted with the superheroes of DirectX, and it's like 2 guys going like this and 2 girls going, like on the sidelines, like posing in every frame, like showing it off. It's like, at least if you're going to draw me as a superhero, don't give me a G-string, and please, can I be doing something cool in the comic book? Like, I am a comics nut, but consistently, and I'm a games nut, consistently, the messaging from larger companies tends to focus on the demographic that they perceive is going into computer science. The advertising needs to change. The way that we're actually engaging at our conferences needs to change. We need to stop having dinner with our best friends.
I'm a little afraid that the approach might result in marginalizing women in computer science again, the way women, I think, have been marginalized in the more artsy fields.
Because they're extras or
they're like in localization because women are good with language, or they are in people management because they communicate so well.
That's right.
And if we say, okay, now if the approach is, oh, let's look at games and let's look at more design things, do we create a similar space for women there again? I mean,
that's a very good question, and I think that one of the things we don't talk about enough is how just even embracing different cultures of women is important. Like, I have a ton of friends in Sweden at another university whose name I'm going to forget because it's a really long title, but my friend Geshka and some other girls, and they are like hardcore. They're so hardcore, and like when I hang out with them, I'm like, I'm just like an AI person who likes to read about psychology and stuff, and you guys are like doing massively multiplayer server designs, and that's really crazy. There are women in other communities that I talk to that are way different from me, and I think we don't even just recognize that there are skill sets that are being culturally reinforced here that are not being culturally reinforced in other places. I think we can learn from other women. Just by creating the networks to talk with other women, I now feel more comfortable being a woman in computer science and being the type of woman in computer science that I am. I don't think we all have to be an artist. I also don't think we all have to be a server programmer. And I think that the #1 problem that I have actually as a person who's trying to evangelize cross-disciplinary work or gender-inclusive perspectives is that I meet a lot of women who tell me what women like to play in terms of games. I don't know what women like to play in terms of games. I barely hang out with girls. Like, I'm surrounded by men. I'm surrounded by gamers. I'm lucky if I like something that they all like. Typically, I don't like anything that's out there. You know, I get obsessive about games like Katamari Damacy, and I evangelize them and bring them here and show them to people because it's hard for me as a computer scientist and as a gamer to find stuff that I identify with. The last thing I want to do is tell you what the rest of you women in this room are into, or the men. How am I supposed to know? I want to learn from you, and I think we have to ask the question to learn, not dictate what's true about programmers or whatever. It is true that we are letting a message about computer science be dictated to our youth. We're not changing it. And it's not a true picture. Like, I know computer scientists who spend 90% of their free time cooking because it just turns out that they're totally obsessed with food. Or making music is another one that's very popular. So many people that I know are into music. And like, we're just like, you know, they're on whatever website reading about the latest, you know, download this crazy remix of Radiohead, whatever. Like, just totally obsessed with music or making it. And it's not something that you normally hear. The other thing is that I kind of get intimidated and frustrated sometimes being an evangelist because I get tired of people doing that. Oh, computer science. I get really tired of that. And I think it can be hard sometimes to not feel that it's okay to be like, yeah, you know? To feel like I have to be a role model all the time and be like positive about it and be like, yes. Like, I sat in front of a developer evangelist at this conference during a demo, and he said something about something being CPU bound, and then he literally looked up at me and said, you know, I just had this thing where like I was realizing that normally you'd be like a marketing chick and I'd have to like explain that. That's so cool. And it's like, yes, it is cool, but like just by saying that, you're making me feel like such a heel. You know, like you're just taking me out of the group of people that you were just talking to and being like, ooh, 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 different. You know, and that is also exhausting, and I think it's something that if you're doing this thing, if you're trying to do computer science and evangelizing and be a woman at Microsoft, you're probably not able to really just be like, you know, like occasionally in a meeting, just be like, actually, I just said that 5 minutes ago and you repeated it and now everyone's looking at you. You know, Virginia Valiant's book, Why So Slow, like a total eye-opener. How many times have I said stuff in meetings and been interrupted mid-sentence and then had the same thing I was saying repeated by someone else and had them get the credit for it? We're all keeping these counters in our heads. Those kinds of things are things we need to be able to talk about with each other and be honest about. And then the last thing, and then I'll shut up and let someone else ask a question, is that I meet a lot of women who are used to being, and I can't say it any other way, the only pair of tits in a room. Like I meet a lot of women who are like, I was the only girl in my physics program and I liked it. It's really advantageous to be a female in computer science on some level because you are different. People don't know how to handle you. You can do stuff that other people aren't normally going to do, and you're going to get attention for it or you're going to get a reaction, and you can use it to your advantage. Those kinds of things are true, and they're true across the board just between the genders. Like when I'm in a room full of guys, like I'm always like, trying to like figure out how to manage that stuff. We need to be more friendly with each other, and I think play nicer, and realize that sometimes working together to remove the cause means actually working together, letting other women speak, letting other women's ideas be evangelized, not being the only person at the conference who's speaking. And it's hard sometimes if you're an achiever and evangelizer to sort of do that. That's my personal devil, like learning to open up and be like, I'm so excited that you're here, even though we both are wearing the same shoes. You know, like that is like my #1 pet peeve, you know. Ugh, like I really thought these were the coolest sneakers I could have worn. So cool that you got them too. Like, but you know, getting over those stupid things. I mean, and it's so stupid, but it's, you know, it's true. Like, you know, my education was about me. My life is about me. I am my own avatar. I'm going through my own computer game. I have to work extra hard to make sure that I don't steamroll other women in the process of actually trying to be a proponent of women. Because I think you just get spoiled. So, anything else?
So I had a question. You had mentioned that you had talked to somebody who advised you to, if you're going to go into computer science, you should love math. Do you feel like if you've talked to freshmen or seniors in high school today, is that the same message they get, that they should love math to do computer science?
I try to change that. Like I speak at an event yearly at Northwestern, although this year I skipped it, so I was happy second. But I try to change the image that actually, yeah, no, you don't need to know math to be a computer scientist. I think computers are now a different thing than they were when I was young. And I think that girls are getting the message that computers are hip and cool to communicate with. I don't know that they're getting the message that computers are something that you can have a positive or like controlling sort of relationship with, like an impactful tinkering relationship with. I think the tinkering message is the one I'd want to push, and I don't know that that's getting pushed that often. At the same time, I know that girls' scores in math and science are going up, so we're doing something right, and we're teaching them that they can be good at these things and not feel bad about it. But I don't get out there enough. I mean, that's my answer to you, is that I wish I taught in high school somewhere sometimes. I wish I was actually interacting with girls that age and knowing more about it. I guess I would turn the question on you then and ask you guys, what's your experience as people that are supposedly pushing on research and trying to have this gendered sort of participatory, gender equal kind of stuff going on in your groups and like in the groups that you interface with? What are the things that you think I should be talking about that I'm missing? What are some of the problems that are out there that I'm glancing across? Like, is funding really so huge? Am I overemphasizing it? Like, are there things I can change in my talk that will make it more accurate? I had to get something. Something? Anything? Nothing. Well, that's depressing. I want to learn from you guys. I want you to teach me some stuff, too. Anything, I mean, I guess the fine arts thing, that's the other thing, is like in the fine arts, are women being marginalized the way they're being marginalized typically in business and computer science? Business technologies? Computer technologies?
I didn't understand your question.
Are women being shuttled into sort of artistic roles or artistic expressive roles the way they are often in business? Like, oh, the woman is a communicator and stuff.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, that happens in music.
Yeah.
I mean, look at orchestras, they're full of men.
Baltimore Symphony. First female music director.
That's cool.
And people were pissed.
Yeah.
Yes, they
The
were
orchestra voted to a man is probably the right.
Really?
Not.
Yeah,
No, not so. Essentially, they
orchestra
just
voted-
didn't like working with her, and they often don't like working with her.
Well, actually, the reports I heard were that they unanimously voted
Yes,
not.
to a person. Exactly,
yes,
they did.
yes.
But also, they did it because everybody on the board, the musicians on the board, were completely ignored. That's what they were really pissed off at. So, it's a business decision, and that's what they were pissed off at.
Just something maybe related, but I think one of the reasons why a lot of women might choose not to go into computer science is the perception. I'm not sure if it's only perception or really truth. To me, it has the ring of truth. That a lot of computer science related jobs are being outsourced these days.
Yes, yeah.
So why study something, spend a lot
It's
of time, and
useless.
then be unemployed afterwards?
Well, and that's the thing. If we evangelize computer science as programming
Yeah.
and building applications,
Yeah.
actually doing computer
Exactly.
architectures, designing and implementing them, software architectures, you're gonna lose people. If you say, I have some friends at a company in Boston that were all in a band called Tribe, and then they ended up working at this company called Looking Glass and doing music for some video games, and then they made a game company. They went off and they designed four unique music titles, and now they're doing a fifth one. One of my graduate students is working on it. It involves a guitar controller. How awesome is that? Their games are not shipping tons of units, but they are the only thing out there in the niche. Karaoke Revolution, Frequency, Amplitude. They did an iToy game where you actually get to sort of use a jet board, and it's really fun. When I say to people, I have friends who are musicians who also programmed, who started a company that is financially successful, that is making products that are about music. They go, I never heard of that game, but it's a hook, like you're a musician, play this game, think about how programs could be used to do something interesting. And a lot of people are already having to use technology. They just have the interface-based relationship with it. They don't have that underlying impression of how computers work. And I think one of the things I didn't say in this talk, which I realized while I was talking with someone earlier today, is that it's a financial, it's like shooting yourself financially in the foot to have everyone that uses computer software have an interface-based relationship with it, because that's a ton of help desk calls. And it's a ton of FAQ managing and all this BS, When people know what a driver is, they don't have to go and call the tech person. And we are crippling ourselves as a solutions-oriented culture if we keep commodifying and productizing software and software processes as it's just clickable, just does everything smart, because it never just does everything smart. Computers are stupid, They're so stupid, That's the one thing about being a computer scientist that I wish I could take back, my belief that the computer was actually brilliant, People don't know how dumb they are. And if I were going to teach computer science, one of the first things I would do is put a computer up in front of the class. Like if I were a professor at a tenured professor at a university, my first computer programming class, Computer Programming 101, everyone would come to class, they would pick up a hammer at the beginning, each of them would get to hit the computer until it was just a bazillion, million little pieces of plastic. Because if you don't get that out of them when they first encounter the machine, and right now it's college, hopefully this wouldn't have to happen because it would be elementary school and they'd probably hit each other, but getting that aggression out and getting them to know that it's their thing, like they own it, is something I think is really important. I would also make them all read The Language of Clothes, which I think is a fabulous book.
I have some very close friends that are computer scientists, and I think they like the dominant stereotype. And I think they fit that dominant stereotype, and they're very comfortable with it.
Sure.
And maybe they'd be interested in changing, and maybe they'd be interested in different types of people coming into the industry, but they're not really faced with that all that often.
No.
And so it's not at all painful for them, and
Yeah, it's not a
not
pain
at
point.
all interesting, really, to
Yeah.
them. What do you think about that? I mean, how do we...
I think it comes down to actually getting your nose out a little bit and saying, out of the little cubbyhole that you're in, whatever it is you're working on and geeking out about, I think universities need to embrace the fact that being part of the curriculum deciding community or the education community at the university involves looking beyond your own experience of the discipline a little bit and asking someone to just be a little bit more aware of what's going on in the popular culture with respect to their discipline, I think is not an unreasonable question. Having said that, most of my best friends are computer scientists, and I love hanging out with them, and I am more of a computer scientist than I'd like to admit. And I think it's important that, like I said earlier, we learn to get along and like appreciate one another for our strengths instead of talking at cross purposes. I feel the same way about marketing. You know, at this meltdown thing, you know, the marketing people say one thing, and then all the engineers go, well, what about this? Haven't you thought about this? What about this? You guys, and the woman is sitting in front of the room going, of course we thought of that. Like, it's not on message. We're not going to do it, so we're not going to talk about it, because that's her impression of how you deliver a message. Is you pick the most relevant facts, you state them like 10 times. But the engineering environment is like, I have a new idea. The minute you start talking, I thought of something better to say, like, la, 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 la. And like, you watch them do it, and you can go to any kind of a community and see the marketing people and the execution people just like, whew, whew. It's like they're lobbing giant grenades at each other. That starts in our education. It starts when you put people in groups and go, this group is going to do the math project, this group is going to do the art project, you know? And the math people look at the art people and go, why is she talking so nice to them? Like, why is the math people at the math project? You know, like, there's little tiny things we do all the time. And we can't, like, fix everybody, but I think we can make people sort of have to like, check in with the mothership occasionally, and also just learn to be like, you know, that was really cool how you did that funny thing. Like, I wouldn't have done it that way. This is my approach. But it was really cool that you did that, because it made me think. Giving each other credit is the other thing. Like today I was having a conversation with someone, and he said at some point, you know, you're just really great. You're so great. Like, that's awesome. You're so great. Like, how often do I hear that in my life? You know, I wish more people would just say, that's awesome. You're really great, to the cab driver or whatever. You know, like, we need to do a little bit more of that positive reinforcing in our communities and not be so like, rat's cheese work stuff, that we're not reinforcing each other's styles. But it's really easy to say that when you're not beholden to a schedule, or you're not beholden to a budget, and you're not trying to improve enrollment. So.
Have you looked at like all girls colleges to see if there's a difference in enrollment there?
Actually, it's interesting that you asked that, because Ellen ended up going to a Claremont college, one of the Claremont colleges that's all female, and she teaches all female computer science courses. And I think it's just been her mission to make sure that there are more women out there who love math, and who love math and computer science. And I'm not like a friend of hers. I mean, I just literally had this glancing interaction with her, and then at some point she came to the U of C to apply for a job before we just parachuted out of there. And I don't really know, again, what it's like at all women colleges, because I don't travel to colleges to give this lecture. But hopefully, in 3 years, I will. That's a really good question, and I should just go to an all-girls college and just camp out for a month and just see what it's like.
It is a good question. I once, like a couple of weeks ago, checked that out and wanted to see what kind of tracks do they offer. And it's mostly like the really traditional women's stuff, like dancing, nursing, whatever. So most of them, not all of them. But.
Actually, there was an interesting, John Nordlinger had an interesting comment. I went to a Birds of a Feather gathering at this after Meltdown, and there was a guy who was teaching at Howard University and also at USC. And a lot of the schools that focus on minority education, especially higher education in our country, are having serious problems with computer science enrollment. And that's like a huge impact. So I imagine it's probably mirrored at all girl colleges. I have two of my friends at school. One went to Howard and the other went, I forget where she went, both young black women who are super awesome, lovely colleagues of mine who I miss already, now that I'm graduating. You only miss people after you leave. It's like you can't miss them enough when you're there. But they both had the experience of taking computer science in a women's college and then coming to computer science curriculum as graduate students, not having the like sharp elbows and the like experience of competing for attention and stuff, and felt really like, why aren't I getting better mentoring? Why is my professor expecting me to just design all this stuff on my own? Why aren't I, like, there's just no scaffolding here. There's zero help. And it's been one of their fundamental issues as students to focus on, with their advisor, with the organization of black students, with computer science as a whole, on sort of bridging the gap between their experience of a really focused curriculum that was trying to get them into the scene to this like free-for-all of like, yeah, barely anyone can keep funded, so just do something really smart and get it published. You know, I think that's actually, and I hadn't thought about it, but that's going to be a problem, because if people start doing what I say, then there's going to be this influx of students arriving into traditional computer science programs where everyone's struggling, and they might actually just be like, well, this is actually totally sucky, false advertising, I'm going to become a biology major. I already know how to program. Screw you guys, I'm going home. You know? So that's a really interesting, it's an interesting thought. I'll have to put that down in my notes. But I think that's pretty much it. If you want to sort of chit-chat some more or whatever, I'm fine. But sadly my flight leaves at 5:30, so I have to get into the car and drive across Seattle. But thank you for your time. I really appreciated it. Thanks.